telling me if you need 2 or more people listening in order for it to record sound. So there's 2 of me. There's a me and another me. It's like the Matrix. There's a me and another me. Okay, so what I'm going to do. With this second session is just get into some PHP and just work on a very basic level. So that's my intention for this time around. And I see another viewer. We assume that's our other guest coming in. So that's what I'm basically going to do, and we're going to start off with just some basic items. Some of the things we did see last time, but you know, we just start at a basic starting point and then move forward. So let me switch over to another screen. Okay, that's done. All right, so this is an HTML file, and we have already seen in the last session the introduction of the PHP tag right there. And I mentioned before that you can configure PHP. It has its own ini file that's configurable, and each server you set it on, and that's an option whether you want the PHP after the open tag, and then there's the close tag doesn't have the PHP letters. So I put it in whether it's optional or not, just so I don't have to remember it. It just, some people like less clutter. And so one of the main commands that you use in PHP is echo. And there's another one that you'll see around called print. And the only real difference between echo and print is echo, you can use commas and echo out several things. So it's like a console log that you might see doing JavaScript. Most console logs also will take commas in between. And so all we're doing here is simply echoing a string, and we find that there's the use of single quotes or double quotes for a string that's literal. So first we'll work on data and just go through some of the quirks that are different from PHP. Since both of you folks are in the JavaScript class, you do know that you are seeing some of the data as well over there. So we have literal data as well in PHP, just another programming language. Nothing much different when we go from one to another, except sometimes in the syntax that we work with. So if we view this, let's just see, get my screens together here so I can go from one to the other. And let's see, where do I have this? So it's just outputting the HTML, and then the PHP is being included in wherever you like it. And you can have as many PHP tags where you need them and where you might want to integrate it. So we'll be working with a hybrid. So last time we talked about PHP scripts that are 100% PHP, PHP scripts that are 100% HTML in the anticipation that you might want to add some PHP in the future, and the hybrid, which is great for learning how to do things, and you can output to it. And include some HTML. Saves you a little time learning and also in developing standard type pages. So you can output this entire page with PHP if you like, and there are some shortcuts for that, but we'll stick with this for the time being. And so let me just see where we're going to go next is to let's look at the commenting capability in PHP. It's pretty straightforward. You'll find these are different from one to another, but some things are common. You have the double / for a comment on any line, and you can put that at the end of a line as well. And I'm really curious, you can see that. Okay, so that's just commenting your code, and that gets stripped out when PHP runs on the server. So when the file, in this case, this file is loaded on the server, first PHP goes through the file, the actual PHP interpreter, looks for PHP tags and processes them, and it throws away the comments. So the comments, again, could cause a performance issue on a server because they have to be processed, but PHP is really fast in string processing. Then we also have something that's you can use this pound sign for a comment too. Same thing, single line comment. You can use that if you like. This goes into things like operating systems, and some people just like it. I would stick with the double slash, and then you also have the block comment. And that's a slash asterisk, and you can put your comment in, and you can then close the block. And you don't have to put it all in one line like I did, but that's certainly a way of doing it, and you can have several lines. If you type better, try that, and then you just type in your code as you like. And if you want to remove some code temporarily, you can use this as a way to remove code temporarily. You have a couple lines, you can either use, if it's just one line, you use the double slash. If it's a couple lines, you use this, and it takes the code out. Still sitting there in case you want to reuse it. All right, so comments, not too complicated, and use them as you like. So that's that one. All right, so let's go take a look at some variables, and so I'm going to strip all this out. And I have separate files for this, so when we're done, I'll upload the files like I did last time, but I have separate files. So I'm just going to use one file and keep mutilating it back and forth, changing things in it, and maybe copying and pasting some from another. And then I have several files that you can look at separately. So creating a variable, the variables start with a $sign. And then you come up with whatever name you want. You'll see that some of the practices is a two-word variable is done with an underscore. You'll see that very common in the PHP world for programming. In the JavaScript world, which we were doing in the other class, I'll just throw a script tag up here real quick. And you want to create a variable in scripts, in JavaScript, you could do the same thing. However, in the JavaScript world, we use the other format more often, with the first letter being lowercase and then all the following multiple words with an uppercase. So you can look into the various practices in each language. That's a more common practice, actually, in most languages. But you're going to find if you're going to be working with JavaScript and PHP in the same file, you'll confuse yourself sometimes just because you have two different ways of indicating a variable. So I'll take this out because it's just going to be in our way. All right, and then you have assignment operators. So anything on the left side is going to assume they get some data, and on the right side you would put an expression. So we have the same idea in all programming languages as an expression. Expression is a combination of literal data. A string can be put inside a single or double quotes. In PHP, they actually have a little difference. We'll see that a little later on in how they can handle variables inside of them. And then they can also be variables that we can put on the other side as well, expressions of all different types. So there is no data typing inside of PHP, so we don't have to define the variable to be a particular data type. It does it dynamically. So this would be automatically considered a string as far as PHP is concerned. And if you created a number, you would do it this way, and it would automatically assume that's a number. And in that case, it doesn't. It's going to assume a string. And so we have some functions and things that we'll be able to use to actually test those. As if you're writing a program where the data is not quite clear, you might want to test to see whether what kind of type it is, and there is functions for doing that. So hopefully your programs are clearer. And so I take this out, and let's just do something that's I'm going to create a variable called first underscore name. I'll set that equals to Joe. And I'll copy this, and we'll create a last name. so we're going to do dirt here, and we're going to use the echo to echo these variables out. So we have echo, we can create an expression after echo. And the concatenation operator, so again, expressions have operators in them, and in PHP it's not the plus sign for concatenating text, it's a period. And that'll throw you. You'll be running down that bug. And what follows echo is a valid expression. It will all be automatically parsed into text, so if you're combining numbers and text, it will put it all as text for you. And what we want to do here is put in the variable. And I'm also going to throw in a BR tag because we'll have a couple of these. All right, we're outputting to HTML renderer, so on the other side of this is being seen in an HTML renderer. So if we don't put in some HTML tags, it's not going to, it's all going to end up on one line, so it'll be confusing to see. And let's go over, I guess I could share the whole screen actually, but so if I refresh this, we can see that, there you go, you got first name and Joe, and we talked last time, if you look at the source, and I'm in Firefox, so it opened up a separate window, what it sends back is all HTML. So you're just, the only thing that's coming back is text. PHP doesn't send anything unusual back. Whatever comes back is text, and if in that text you had some HTML tags, there they are. So straightforward. I'm going to go back over to, we don't need this window. Okay, so I'm going to copy this line, and I'm going to use single quotes. And I'm using an editor that does a little trick. When you have text highlighted, it will automatically put in some, and I did it again, it automatically wants to handle the process of putting in wrapper items such as quote marks and parentheses, and so this one does it for me. It gets me a little confused sometimes. And what I'm going to do is, actually I didn't really want that one. I'm going to take that out, and I'm going to take this out. And so what I've done is reduce this to one literal string, but the variable's inside the string. And I'm going to do another line just like that, and I'm going to put in double quotes at the beginning and end. All right, so we'll see the difference between what happens when a variable appears inside of a literal string. And that's one of the big differences that you have in PHP. So the case where you're using single quotes, the variable is treated just as plain text, no different. But where you have a variable stuck inside of a literal double-quoted string, it actually interprets it. So that could be convenient for you. Now, I found personally that can confuse me if I go back and forth between the two different ones. So I'll be a little less efficient because I'm more likely to concatenate variables together and literals together that way, rather than try these shortcuts and get confused because you get lost. But you'll see different programmers have ways. So if you're looking on the internet and you're wondering, you're looking at somebody's good example and you see the variables inside and they're trying to explain the problem, they're just assuming you know this. So you can then do it whichever way you like. So this is just more or less treat it literally right there. And so that's it. I mean, when you get the example one of the examples I made, I'll bring this over and we'll just go down to demo mode here. Bring this over where I can see it. Okay, so there's this example more blown out, and you can just see you can do some shortcuts where you actually have two variables together, and it'll put a space in if it's being interpreted as a variable or not. And some manipulations. You see here's a case where we actually have to put the comma in, and we used a single quote technique, and there the comma ends up just being part of the entire flow. And nothing too fancy there. Next thing is we'll look at some numbers. So as I said before, I'm just going to keep changing this, say from opening a lot of files. So here you go, you got price equals 100, and you want to do a cost is equal to, wrong one, equal to 0.5, 15, let's see, what do we do here? Just 25. I'm looking at a different line. And you want to echo out the formula for this, price minus cost. And they did not mention that you need a semicolon at the end of every line, whereas in JavaScript, the other course you're in, that's an option, but it's considered a best practice in that. So in all cases, in both languages, actually, you can put several computer code lines on the same text file line, and in that case, the semicolon is always necessary to indicate when a line comes to an end. So this is just simply going to print out the subtraction of these two, nothing too fancy again. And we got 75, as you see, as the result. And so let's throw in a discount. And with a discount, we'll just put in 0.5. So basically this is considered an integer. This would be considered probably a float. But as far as PHP is concerned, it treats them all the same. They're just numbers. And if you're using, excuse me. Hang on. Hold something on my vocal cord. It treats them that way. So this is basically just considered a floating point number at this point. So if we want to take the discount times the price, for example, we would do multiply it times 1 minus the discount, and then subtract that from the cost. So 1 minus the discount would give us 0.85. So you get price times 1. And so we're going to just look at the order of operations as similar in most programming languages. And we're probably expecting a little different result. Our expectation would be basically $85 minus $25. Instead, we've got 15 cents taken off, so that really wasn't what we wanted. So you have the order of mathematics has to be changed, so you want to actually do the subtraction first. So multiplication and division on a simple level, those four operators, multiplication, division, are before the addition and subtraction in terms of order. So you can use parentheses in your formulas to change the order of mathematics. So what it's saying here is this is going to be subtracted first. And you can nest as many of these as you like. And that should give us hopefully a result that makes more sense. And $60. So $100, take 15% off, gives us 85 minus 25, gives us our 60. And so nothing too fancy yet, but it's just the basics that we have. Oops, went the wrong window. All right, so where do we go next? Just be careful when you're working with strings in an expression, especially echo, because you'll use a lot of cases where you want to echo data back that's going to be part of the page and rendered in the page. So sometimes you'll do something like this. You'll put in the price, also your price, or actually my net, actually we should say my net. And then we're going to concatenate this. All right, so let's go see what happens. And we get some interesting results here. We know that All we did was add in some text in front of it. And so we got basically a strange result. And so what you do again is put parentheses around things. So what we want to do is make sure this entire math formula is done first, or done as a group. This way things will work better if you're trying to concatenate text and any kind of math formula that's involved. So you run into that problem a few times, and that one's actually more obvious than some. You might not notice that you're actually off by that much. All right, so now we've got what we wanted. All right, so pretty much everything else in PHP for doing numeric expressions is the same as you find in other programming languages, except that you will be doing a lot of using something like echo to put expressions back, and they'll be part of the HTML rendering, and you need to make sure you do the steps correctly. And you also could have intermediate steps. You could calculate an intermediate variable to simplify the look of the code rather than having a long formula stuck in the middle of an expression like that. That's a programmer's choice as how you would want to do that. So we do have functions. There's a lot of functions in PHP. So I'm just going to be tearing this down, and we'll just use echo again. And one of the more popular ones is RAND, which is the random number generator in PHP. And it looks good. We probably should put a BR tag at the end of that because I'm going to do a couple of them. Alright, so I'll go over and take a look at that. And I'm just going to keep refreshing the page. So in JavaScript, you know, you get a number between 0 and 1. In PHP, you get a big number. And I've read some cases that if you're running your server on a Windows machine and you're running PHP, there may be an issue with the actual size of the number. So you can look that up. If you get a little smaller number, or it might be a version of it. And so that's basically a random number. Not much to that. The nice part about PHP is that the function is a little easier to use because you have less formulas. So I'm going to copy this one, and if I want a random number between 1 and 6, it has arguments that are optional. So in programming languages, you often have functions that will have optional arguments. Put little spaces in there to make it more readable. That'll give us a number between 1 and 6. And you know that's the famous way we do rolling of a dice or a die. So we got numbers between 1 and 6 as I refresh it. Right, so I'm going to put a couple in all at once so we can use our time more efficiently. So this will be cut and paste. Alright, so the seal function and the floor function. So unlike JavaScript, where there's an object where these functions are attached to, PHP, they're just plain functions, are considered language functions. So the seal function is going to give you, it's going to cut off the decimal and give you the actual integer that you see here. I'm sorry, it's actually going to round it up. So it's going to take this up to 5 and then cut off. So it adds 1 to it, basically. And the floor function just works in the opposite way. And there's a couple other examples of it, so we'll go and take a look at that one. So I'm including some text in this so we can see which one is which. So, and you see that the seal function gave us the next highest integer, the floor function gave us the next lowest integer, and there's just one in there that has a big long float just to see how that one worked. And again, it gives you it cuts it all off. Alright, so we're going to go over to the web browser. And I think I'm in there. Yes. And I don't. Alright, so this is just the page in the PHP documentation. You can see all the different functions. We worked with floor. Here's ran down here. There's a round function if you need to round to a specific location. You're doing some trigonometry, I don't know why with PHP, but you might. And last time I mentioned to you, there is a documentation page for all these things, there's the syntax. It returns an integer. It has two variations. One where you pass nothing to the argument, returns an integer. In this case, you have to have 2. And it will indicate whether they're optional or not. So in this case, since there's no indication they're optional, you'll see, pretty sure it uses square brackets to indicate optional, but you can pass in a lower and a higher integer. And it always has details about it. Here's explaining the 2 parameters that you can pass in. And it's key, what version was it introduced? I mentioned this last class. You might find that there might be, this is up to PHP 5, but you might find that sometimes one of these methods or functions that are in PHP has an argument that was added in a particular version. So just make sure the version you're going to deploy to is checked for anything like that. And then they always have some samples down here, and they try to show you the results. So we won't go to every documentation page. I just want to make you comfortable with going there. Normally I find them by typing in Google PHP and the function or what I want to try to do, and normally this website comes up first. And so that's takes care of. Let's see. I'm just going to quickly cut and paste a couple of other ones in, and then we'll move on. So math and min, max and min are very commonly used math functions. So usually some kind of a function to truncate decimals. Random numbers are used in some cases for gaming. PHP side, you might find some uses in random numbers, again, for gaming. And then max and min. So the way these functions work, they take one or more, actually I think it's 2 or more numbers, and gives you either the highest value or the lowest value. And so in this list we got 10, 3, 203, and the max gave us 200, and the min gave us a 3. And I just want to go back over to PHP one more time, just so you get a little familiar with the syntax. So here's max, for example. Now I use the word mixed, and so that's indicating different data types. In fact, it also has an array. We'll get to arrays in a minute or two, not just right away. And you can see there's commas for the different parameters. And then you start to see these square brackets. That means it's optional. So you can either pass it an array, that's one version of it, or you can pass it a series of comma delimited numbers, at least 2. So if you only put 1 in there, you'll probably get an error. All right, and actually, let's go see an error. So what we'll do is we'll just put one number in and see whether it throws an error or not. Okay, so there you go. There's an error. These can be suppressed. They're often suppressed on the public servers that you rent. So you won't see the error on the public server. And so, and you can turn it on, although you don't want your users seeing these things. Most public servers give you a way to turn them on. And you can do them actually in PHP itself. I don't want to get into that right today, but I just want, if you ask me when we get to the breakpoint, you know, I can look some up and show you some examples. So if it's on, you'll see these errors. And normally on the development machine, I have it on. I want to see all the errors that I have in my PHP as fast as I can see them. And it's telling me where it is and giving me some basically information, which file it's in and which line number it is currently on. And there's a log that logs these errors. So the errors are actually in a log file, both on your personal server and also on the main server that you might be in the public environment. And you can go see those. And so definitely on a shared hosting environment, check your errors to make sure there's nothing that's building up in a rapid way, because sometimes if they're having some trouble with their performance on their server, they'll start looking through the log files, and if they see a particular person with some really bad PHP, they might send you a little nudge to say clean it up. And I've had that happen to me a few times, which was kind of good because it was a bad error, so I got rid of it. All right, so let's see, that's that one. So now we'll look at something called arrays. And so arrays are the ability to create a variable that represents multiple pieces of data. That's all it is. So rather than just having one name for it, you can have several names for it. All right, so that's a variable, and it's equal to some text. It only holds one value. All right, so we've seen that a few times already tonight. So for arrays, we have different kinds of arrays. So the basic array, they kind of call it the indexed array. And you need a function to create it. So I'm going to create an array called states. And you set it equals to a function called array. And actually you can see this editor is seeing some things. I don't know whether it's from other files, but it's got a list of possibilities. And then inside of parentheses, a list. And we can put in here new. When you get used to that automatic close function that this editor does, it's kind of nice. You just got to get used to it. So we'll put in a couple of strings in here, basically. And they could be variables. We might see an example of a variable, but whatever you want in your list. Pennsylvania. And we have an indication here that we need a semicolon at the end. So that creates our array. Now, echoing an array, you get some kind of strange results. Actually, I didn't plan to do it that way because I never do it that way, but let's throw that in there too. We're going to have another way of getting some data out that you're going to find very useful when it's complex data like this. So we just echo states, and I think we're going to get something that you wish you didn't get. And then we're going to do it with something called Var Dump. So there's a function that's called var _ dump. And generally that's how you output your arrays. And let's see. You need an echo command for this, I think, but let's double check. All right, so let's go over and run it. And if I think I need an echo in there, but I always do. I'll show you why. Something went wrong there on line 18. All right, so there's the echo line. It's blowing up. This is the line that's just echoing the array and trying to concatenate it to a string. Doesn't like that. There is a array to string. And then this is the var dump by itself, which you can see is a little bit confusing, but it's showing you there's an array with 3 positions. At the first position there's a string with 10 characters, and let me bump this up. And it's got New Jersey in it, and then it's got a second position. It's got each one of these choices as you see it goes along. All right, so that's var dump. And it's kind of a nice function for you to do debugging and testing. I use it all the time. And I'm not sure why I put echo in front of it, but let's go back and... Oh, I know. I usually put echo in front of it. I'm going to put some strings in to classify it. So you could do it different ways. For example, you can do echo and then inside of quotes here, or single quotes, we'll put actually... single quotes, $states, colon, and then a comma. So the comma is part of the echo function. It allows you to create a list of items you want to see. So sometimes I'll do it this way, and so I know what I'm actually looking at. Whereas over here, if we come back to the current output, You see, I don't know what the variable name is. There's no way to know. And that's all right, it's just only doing one or two, but when you start having several of them outputted, it's nice to have a way to see them. All right, so I'll leave that for a second. We're going to add another line. And the other one is print _r. And this outputs it just in a little different format. And this is the one I use most often. So we'll come back over to our output and we'll check this out. And let's see, what do I need to do here? Oh, I need to add in, let me go back. One other thing we need to do is add in a pre-statement. We don't want HTML formatting. So I'm just going to throw in the pre-tag, which just gets rid of all the HTML formatting, which includes sucking out all the spaces. And now it looks better. So you got to realize it's sending back HTML. Since we're sending back HTML, this carriage return gets taken out, the space gets taken out. So now we're just seeing it as is. And so the first one is the Var Dump. And it's just giving you a lot of information. So that's useful sometimes when you need to really look at the pieces and find out whether they're strings and how big they are or whatever it is that's about the data. If you just want to look at the data, then print _r is kind of handy. So if you haven't worked with arrays before, their indexed arrays always start with the first position being identified as 0, and then each position after that is incremented by 1. So if we come back and output one of those positions, one of those indexes, and in this case we're not going to use the print function. And let's put another one. Let's do position 10. We know it's not there, but let's see what happens. And you can see we're getting an error thrown for the 10 because we don't have 10 items in there, but position 0 gave us New Jersey. And since I didn't put any BR in there, this is kind of stuck up on the side, so we can just assume that starts on the next line, and that's the one that's throwing the error. So you might want to do that. This one creates its own line feed, the printr function. So there you go. That's basic indexed arrays, and they can contain mixed data. So one array position can have string, next array position can have a number. You can have an array position within an array. That's what they call multi-dimensional arrays. We're not going to demonstrate those tonight, it'd just take too much time, but you can have arrays at different levels. So any type of data that you can put in or expression can go in as each one of these arguments for the array list. We can also add to our array after it's been created. So if you want to create an array with no data, you just have no arguments for the array function. Just leave it blank. So sometimes you are writing a program where you just need to declare the array, get it set up, and then the data gets added dynamically later on. And so you can certainly do it that way. But in either case, whether you have some to start, you can use 2 square brackets and set it equals to more text. In this case, we'll just use text. All right, and then we'll come back over and take a look at that. And you can see it added it on nicely. They also have a function for it. So the function is array underscore push. And you are going to put in the array name and then a comma. I think that's all we need. And of course we won't put a different state in there. And put a little spacing in there just to make it a little more readable. And you might say, well, why bother with that when I can do it the other way? Well, you can do a whole list here. So if you need to add several items in, this might be more convenient than several lines repeated. Oh, good. Thank you. Sorry about that. I do go back and forth sometimes. So just to repeat, since this got off screen, you can add an array. I think we saw this part. You can add one just by simply assigning it to two empty square brackets. This may be a relatively newer PHP feature, but most of the PHP out there handles it. I mean, you have to go back several versions. Then here's the array push function. So arrays have a whole series of functions. In fact, there's a myriad of them that do many, many things to work with array data. And the first argument is the array name, and then a series of values. So you can have more than one value. And so that's the reason why you might want to use this one. This was probably the traditional one. And let's get rid of the line that's throwing the error, which is, did I get rid of that one yet? Let's see. We'll find out. So go back over and take a look at it. And you can see Delaware was conveniently added to our list. Into the line with Var Dump. And I still get the other error down here. So if we come over to, I'll bring you over in a second, PHP array functions, and manual. And there you go. Pull one of the items off the end of the array. You'll find those kinds of things. There's the array push. Pull one off the beginning, so you'll find array shift, array pop, array push are a couple you want to look at right away. Let's go to array push since we used it, just to look at how they do the syntax. Now you'll see ampersands in front of the $sign in the documentation. So you don't put that in. That's indicating that there's a reference to the array. So when the array is passed to the function, it means it's going to have access to it and it can modify it. So in a lot of functions, when you pass data, they are passed in a way so that the function can't manipulate the data. It just receives it and uses it internally. Whereas when you see an ampersand in front, that means that the array can be changed. All right, and then it says that you can pass anything in for one or more additional arguments. So these are, you're adding more than one or more items to the array. And then again, you can go through the documentation, see some examples. It actually returns a value. And let's see what that is. Probably the number of new elements in the array. Number returns the new number of elements. And so on a static basis, line by line, you might not find that useful, but maybe in some program that's running that we don't know what the program's doing, but it's in a loop, it's adding things in some type of a method, or probably a good example is where one of the arguments is an array itself. So you have an array that you're adding another array to up here, and you need to know now how many were in the other one. But again, these functions have a lot of capabilities to them. So array functions. Use them as you need them. There's a lot of them. It'll depend on your programming needs, what you get into. All right, so the next, let's see, anything more we need out of arrays? You should look at count. So we have a array function called count. So everybody always wants to know what the length of their array is. In fact, instead of typing this, save a little time, I'm going to do a cut and paste. So it's just count in the array. And then it'll tell us how many items are in the array. And there it is down at the bottom of my output. Remember the last item for arrays, since it's always zero indexed or indexed arrays, the highest index number is always one less than the actual count because we start at 0. Good. Now, the other kind of array that you have to know arrays when you're working with PHP. JavaScript, you're going to have to know arrays too, but you can get away for a while before you have to get into the array part of JavaScript. Whereas in PHP, arrays are used a lot for some of the things that you use PHP for, which is receiving and sending data. So we have another kind of array called an associative array. And the difference between that and an indexed array is an indexed array, you reference the items by their number, their position, their index. So 0 is the first index. Whereas associative arrays, we have a key name that goes in here. So I'm going to take this all apart. Oh, you're not looking at what I'm looking at. Let's get used to that. One day I'll become rich and I'll have an assistant. All right, so there you go. So again, in indexed arrays, you reference the items by their index number. Whereas a associative array will have a key name that goes in here. It could be a variable. I should point out too that any valid expression can go into this spot here. Anything that calculates a number would be valid. And hopefully it resolves to a valid index too. And so we'll do away with all these. So I'm going to type some of it and then copy and paste the rest. So we just want to create an array. So we're going to call this stocks, lesson stocks and bonds, and it's equal to array like we did with the other one. And the other one we just put in a series of items with commas. This one we're going to put in the key name, and we're going to start with Microsoft. And that should be its stock market key name, or its stock market ticker number, but we'll just assume it's correct. And whatever price it's trading at. According to my screen, that's the current price today. But all right, so that's the key name and then the value. And this little equals greater than is particular to PHP and how it does it. Other languages might use a colon here. And we can then repeat this for another one. And we need a semicolon at the end of the line. So as I said, I am going to cheat, save some typing time, and just put the line in here to dump this out. So it's just a print R function. The comma true, we'll go look that up, but I noticed the last time I didn't need it. The older versions of print R didn't return the data, so they had an argument to return it. So I'll double check it. I guess I put it in as a matter of habit, and I noticed the last one where I was typing ad lib, I didn't put it in, and it seemed to work. Anyway, we'll go take a look at this now. And you can see what the print R is doing for us. It's just outputting the array, and it's showing us the key name and the value. And we can add things to it, just like we did with the other one. We can do stocks. And we put square brackets in. And let's put in Google. Only trouble with Google is it's always got big numbers. 1 million, how much is their stock these days? Alright, so there you go, just the way you did with an indexed array, except you add a key name here. And these key names can be expressions. They can be generated. That's often the case. You might create a associative array where all the keys have a stub, such as lesson 01, 02, 03, 04, and they're created in that fashion. So you're reading from a database and trying to dump out all the lessons in the database, and you want to have them have an ID of lesson 01, 02, 03. You can certainly put this into a loop. So we'll just go and take a look at that. That should add that nicely to the array. And we forgot something. Let's see, what did we forget? No, I put a comma in. I'll fix that without going over there. Between the 1 and for the 1,000. There's still more errors. Oh, there is no commas. I think I'm in the typewriter. Putting commas between my thousands. All right, so there you go. You got Google added to the end of the list. So that's an associative array, just to remind you what we're doing. And certainly you can change the value of something. I mean, there's no difference in adding a new one. What this does, it assumes you're adding a new one. There's no particular order to an associative array. Even though when we dumped it out on the screen, you saw the order in which we added them, don't count on it. There's no reason that there should be an order to an associative array. An indexed array, all the items appear in the order in which they are indexed. And we have sorting capabilities in PHP. We're not going to go to them right away. But we can certainly add another line here and say, and we just give Microsoft the same number, don't they wish? So we'll come over here and refresh this, and we'll see Microsoft's now carrying the same number. So the idea is that you can use your associative arrays and update them later on in the program as you like. I'm just looking at my example to see whether we're going to gain anything more. My example is probably more than we need for a presentation, and it is. So that's all we need. I'm just have more of the same thing demonstrated with strings instead of. Oh yeah, actually this is not a bad example. We should use it. Let's create an array of. Let's just do it this way. We're going to create members. We're going to set it equals to an array. And we could start building the array on the next line, but we're going to create a member ID. So we'll just use email address. So the member ID is joe@dirt.com. And then we're going to assign that to, or it's going to be the key name for, I should say, another array, which is also an associative array. And we're going to have, let's see, two keys, one F name. And of course that'll be Joe. You can use double or single quotes here. I'm getting the double quotes. And so again, this is the key and the array is the value, which is actually another associative array. And so I'll add a second piece to it. I think that's good, and we're going to dump that. Let's see if I did good. Go over and check it out. So you can see here's the key, and then it has an array, another associative array with its own keys. So for some people, this is the equivalent of an object. Kind of the idea of an object. And so we could keep adding more of these to this array. If we wanted to add another member, we could do it in the initialization line here, or we can do it on a separate line. So we have another member, and this member is going to be just some name, doesn't matter what, but we'll just, I have one over here, I'll copy it. That's the key name, and it's going to be equals to an array. And I'll copy it. All right, so again, it's the same structures. I'm keeping the structure the same. There's no real reason that the structure is the same. We certainly can have a mixed structure. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but it's possible. You might have something different on each position. All right, so there's the first item in the associative array, the second item in the outer associative array, and then inside they have their own associative array. And what I was saying earlier is that you might have some different properties for each one of these. They could all be the same or different. And that's pretty basic for associative arrays. Basic idea behind them. All right, so now what we want to do is look at, and probably spend more time than we could use for that. We want to look at using some of these. So we're going to get into what we call the superglobals, which are associative arrays in PHP. As soon as I find my cheat sheet. So again, we're going to steal from this. We'll leave the pre in there. We'll take all these out. So there's a series of superglobals. And you can actually look those up also on the internet. And why don't we do that too? PHP Superglobals. See if they have a nice page listing them, and they do. So here's a list of the superglobals. Notice that all but one of them start with an underscore after the $sign. And there's actually a superglobal called globals. And in PHP, all your variables are global until you create a function. And so that you don't. And so what globals actually is an associative array of all your variables. So whatever variable you create, you can actually do globals, square bracket, and put the variable name as the key name, minus the $sign. So it's just there, they have it. Some people prefer to use globals all the time for creating any variables that are global, rather than creating a separate variable. This way their code is cleaner and easier to see. I don't bother with that, but if you're in a bigger production environment with lots of programmers working together, they might insist on it. But server is one of the important ones, and then we'll hopefully have a little time we can get to these two, because these are the key items. And I was hoping to do session as well tonight, but we'll see. So we're going to introduce server, which is pretty easy to do. Alright, so this is... So what are we going to use to display it? Echo? You can think about it. Are we going to use Var Dump? Print R. So since it's an associative array, we can just use print R. Right, so we come over and take a look at it. And there's the whole pile of data in here. Now you might remember the last session we went over and did a PHP Info, which is a function inside of PHP. And those of you that had XAMPP installed, they actually have that on their default launch page as a link. And it's just a function called PHP Info. And this is one of the items that's in that pile. It just dumps out server. And server is just a variable to indicate all the data that the server is making available to PHP. So whereas there's a server running, it's Apache, it has data in it, lots and lots of data, I'm sure, and some of the data is, quote, exposed in all development environments or all web environments, and so in this case is exposing these variables to PHP. So this is it. On this server, these are all these server variables I have access to through PHP. And the other word of warning is, although you see it on your local server, don't guarantee that it's the same on every one of them. Some of them are on every one of them. You won't not see it. Script file name, pretty much you'll see on all of them. Request method, you'll see on all of them. But double check to make sure if you're using any of these that they exist on the server that you're running. I don't know if I make this bigger, what happens, let's see. Lots of refreshing going on. Okay, now I can see it. So you can see here, there's an interesting one, PHP_self. That key gives you the actual path from the server's root to the actual file, including the file name that we're in. And then there's another one that's redundant. However, maybe in certain contexts they might be different. And this might have, this one here may actually have additional data at the end with the question mark, which we'll get to. All right, so that's simple enough to see a global variable. All you need to do, that's the 8 o'clock warning, the global variable is just a warning, that just a way to see them. Let's take a quick look at globals. I'm going to do that with a cut and paste. So I'll bring you over to the code in a second. Alright, so I added these lines 16, 17, and 18. So I'm creating a variable like we did before. There's a little space in there. And assigning some text. Then I'm creating a variable. I'm using the globals variable, and I'm adding a key. Don't remember, this has already been created, so we don't have to create it. And I'm adding some text to that key. And so we're just going to dump it. Actually, I'm going to comment the other one because so much comes out that it interferes with what we're doing. And so you can see in globals it has other items in there. In fact, it has some of the other global variables are in global. It's interesting enough, but what we really want to look at is down here we have the first name variable, which we didn't assign, we assigned just like we did before, and we added a key. So you can see all your variables, unless they are inside of a function, will be listed in globals. There's the first name one and the second one that we added. And so it automatically created a key inside of globals for this line. And so you can find some forum on Reddit or somewhere on the internet where they discuss who likes using globals and who doesn't. So I don't use it until I get into a more environment where folks have a rule for using it. And I'm not too worried about having too many variables that are global for PHP scripts, because a lot of them just run a short activity and then they're done. So if your scripts don't do a lot, globals are not going to get in your way too much. But it's good practice to try to keep the globals down if you can. But notice that in the case of PHP, there's a lot of globals. All right, so let's move to the get global. So we have get, we have request, and we also have post. And these variables have to do with the data coming in from over the HTTP from a form, from a client's web browser. And I'm just cheating again and just dumping them to the screen using this convenient printr function. And there's nothing in them. They're all empty. So we're going to use them now. So get is a way of sending data most of the time through the URL line. It can be sent from a form, but it's not done that. Forms do not use get as a matter of practice, but a form certainly could send data using this. So data will either show up in get or post. And it will always show up in get if it's part of the URL line up here. Post will come from a form or AJAX. Actually, both of these could come through AJAX. And just to remind you, what AJAX is the ability for JavaScript to send data to the server and request it back without actually getting a whole web page. And so we can specify a post or get as our method. So these are universal methods. They have nothing to do with PHP. It's just the way PHP shows them to you as a programmer. Then PHP has another one called request that combines the first two. So this is more of a convenience variable. So your post variables and your gets will be in it. Right, so if we just simply come up to the command line, and it's probably really tiny on your screen, but if you can see it, and I'm going to put a question mark at the end of the line, and I'm just going to create a key name pair. I'm just going to say fname and equals Joe. I actually capitalized Joe, but it doesn't matter. So you can see in the get Superglobal that added a key, fname, and it's Joe, and it's also in the request, but it's not in the post, because what comes through the URL line are gets. And so you probably saw on the internet quite a bit of URLs with a question mark and something like that after it. Let's try one of the traditional WordPress. Post equals 12. So what happens on the server side is it sees this key name and it looks up in the database, post number 12, and then goes about formatting a web page. Kind of an idea. So you'll see quite a bit of that. Actually, this is a bad SEO item, just so you know. You should use slug names, which is actually a word that goes up there, so we have ways of doing that. But for the time being, we just understand how you can get control over the variables. All right, so I'm going to go back to the code, and I must have some peanut butter and jelly in my finger. It keeps sticking to the trackpad. And let me see what we're going to do first. All right, so to save some time, I'm going to cut and paste. And I need to put this outside the pre-statement, actually. All right, so this is just plain old HTML. And I'm referring to the same file I'm in, only since my example's got a different name, let me get the same name. So this is the same name of the file that I'm actually viewing. And I'm doing the same thing I did on the URL line. And I also put some text in here so we can see it in the display. And I'll refresh the page. And so we have this line. And if I click on it, it's actually going to reload the same page. And you can see I've sent data from a web page to the server. And then the server actually returned the same page along with the data. And so this basically is what's happening. We're actually sending this request for this file name to the server. Actually, I didn't change the spelling on the second one, so that I should have done. And I'll just do that real quick. So that was just a text version of the link tag. So we're going to call this file and send some data to it. So you can see you can do that in your hyperlinks. That's the cool part. So your hyperlinks on your web page can certainly have data embedded in them. In other words, this could be some kind of an identifier to find some data in a database. You have a whole series of links. Fall back to lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, all links, and there's a question mark, and it has the lesson ID or some piece of data that would be available to find it on the internet and the database, and then it would return back a page with that information in it. So that's gets. There's really not much to them. Oh, there's one more thing. We need to also understand the two items. One is the fact that you might have multiple pieces of data, so I'm going to use the URL line to speed this up. There's an ampersand, and then you can do another. It's a name, it's a key name value pair, the way this works. And you don't actually have to have a value. This is a matter of interest. You can just send the key name back. It will be valueless. And you can test to see if the key name came back. So you might see some examples. Oh, yeah, I'm actually on the URL line on the web browser. So look up the URL line. All right, so I'm not on the script. So up here at the top. Thanks for asking, though. All right, so you can see up here I'm adding an ampersand. But I was just pointing out is you can send back a variable without a value, in which case you just have equals nothing, to test to see if there's a variable coming back, and that's done sometimes too. If the variable's not there, the program does something different. So we'll just put in here lname equals dirt. And I'll refresh the page, just pressing enter. And you can see that's how you do multiple variables. You use ampersands. And I'm going to do another ampersand. I'm going to just say comment up here and say equals to, this is a comment. And press enter. And you can see there's a comment that comes back. All right, so look at some of the URLs that you've in the internet, and you'll see that a lot of them still use this technique of passing data from hyperlinks. And I'm going to copy this this one right here, and I'm going to go over to the script and work it in there. So the last thing I want to show you is the URL encoding that will incur. When you're typing in on the address bar, you don't see it, but we will see it in a second. So what we want to do is we'll take this one and put it in here and put it right here. All right, so basically I'm just building the same line, but it's going to be in code. So I'll refresh. And so now when I click on this link, it's going to reload the page. And I guess maybe in PHP we're not seeing this, but you might see in these a something like %20 up here. So what it will do with certain characters, it will URL encode them. So when you see that, that's just the way certain contexts work. I don't know why I didn't get it here, but I'm not going to worry about it at this point. But you will see certain characters, especially spaces, URL encoded. So there is a process called URL encoding, which prepares the text for the line. So if you have a lot of funny looking characters, then you might want to use URL encoding, and PHP has a function for that. A little more advanced topic for tonight, but just be aware of it since it does deal with this. All right, let's do the form part. And I'm going to cheat. And, so right here, I'm going to take all this out. So I cheated with a form by pasting it in. And I have the form tag, which you should be familiar with from HTML. There's the form tag, the open and close version. I have a commented version of it. The difference between the commented and uncommented is the attribute method. You can see this one is set equals to get, and this one set equals to post. So you can use get with a form, but generally we use post. All right, and then there's the name of the program that's going to receive the data. And it could include path names and more data on here. You could use a full URL with an HTTP colon in here if it was necessary. And then we have 3 input tags. 1, 2, 3. The first 2 are text type. And we have to tell the server what the key name is. And that's the name attribute. And we mentioned this in one of the HTML classes, that you set up a key name. Now you don't need an ID. That's for JavaScripting. So normally the ID attribute, if you're JavaScripting, is the same as the name attribute, but definitely if you're submitting it through the traditional way, you need the name attribute and the key name that the server program is going to expect. And then we're using the third input as a type password, so we should see some asterisks, and that's the key name. And then we just have a plain old submit button. So the type submit means that when you click on it, it's going to go up to the form tag and process the action, and all this data will be sent. So that's kind of built in that way. It's the original way forms work. So submit buttons, if you have an input tag that's the type submit, it creates a button. It uses the value attribute to give you the actual label, and when it's clicked, it's automatically going to call the script and send all this data along with it using this method. And that's the traditional way. And you need to really understand this to even learn the other ways. Just get the basics down. And what else do we want to do here? We probably want to dump some data. Actually, I think we're dumping enough data. I think I'm going to add one more up here. I'm going to add server and one of the keys, and it's called request underscore method, just for interest. And I probably need to use double quotes because I'm inside of single quotes. And this editor is going to get mad at me, I bet. Thank you. And I'll just copy this over to the other part of the expression. And I think we need a BR tag at the end of it. All right, let's go and see that running. All right, refresh the page, and there's data coming back because I refreshed the page with the URL. Look up the URL line. I got all this other information up here, so I'm going to take that out, and now I'll just press enter, and all our variables are empty. And it automatically assumes get when an HTML document comes back. It just assumes get. All right, so here's our form. So I'll type some data in. Joe Dirt, and his password is, and then I'll hit send. And I have an error here. Let's see what my error is. I get the wrong program name. and my website's not too friendly when you try to break into it. So in the action, I have to just have the wrong name. I'm going to change the code without taking you over there, and then you'll see it when we get back. It's supposed to have this name in the form. And let's hopefully get it right this time. There you go. So each web browser will have a different way of handling a form that has a input type of password. The user can turn this feature on and off, so we'll just dismiss that. But more importantly, we can see the data came back. There's the different fields that were on the form. And I'm going to open up Firebug and try to rearrange this so we can see it. Now Firebug, all these web developer tools have a way of sniffing the network, and there are actually separate plugins that just do that one function, and I like the Firebug one. It has a net tab up here, and it will tell us, it will show us data coming in to and from. So I'm going to refresh this page and send the same data. So when you do a refresh on the post, it resends the data. And we have an entry down here. I'm going to open it up. And I don't know if I can make this bigger down at the bottom. I'm not sure if they have that same capability, but I'll try. Nope, only works on the top. But you can see there's a line here showing you the actual URL, and then it has these tabs, and here's the post tab, and there's the password. So anybody can do this. So that's why you need HTTPS, because in HTTP it's all plain text. All right, so we're not using an HTTPS. The only difference between this and HTTPS is that you have a certificate installed on your web server, and your command line will have an HTTPS, or all your entire website runs under HTTPS. The drawback on HTTPS is slower, slightly. So high volume websites try not to run every page on HTTPS. But, you know, if it's a small website, you might just simplify it that way. Anyway, just to point out that the data can be sniffed. And if PHP was sending back data, you'd see it. In this case, it's sending back a whole page. So there it is. There's a whole page. So that's what all this does. So this is just inside of Firebug. And look in your other tools. They all have it in a different way or different place for you to look at and see. And this one you can actually sort it down to specific types of data that you might want to see coming back. I have it under HTML. If I go to all, I might see some other things. All right, so I just want to point that out to you because this is going to be a debugging tool. You'll be sending and receiving data in PHP and it's not working. You got to be able to see what's actually going and coming back. So you can test on either end, but it gets a little cumbersome if you got to output all the server-side stuff in the return. And there'll be some cases where you'll be returning data but nothing visible. It's just doing AJAX, and you'll wonder what's really coming back. So the AJAX, which will be JavaScript, will be blowing up or not working, and you're trying to use console log to see the data. You'll find that that's much more convenient. And you'll just see what actual data you sent and what actual data came back. And if you're sending and receiving certain data structure formats like JSON or XML, which we may look at some other point, but these plugins will actually format that for you so it's easy to read. All right, so that's a simple post. I'm going to go change the method to get. So I'm actually over in the script, and I'm just changing the forms method attribute to get. So I'm going to refresh this. All right, and now what I'm going to do is come down here and fill in some data. And hit send. And you can see the request method it saw was a get. And you can see the data is in the get variable. And look up here on the URL line. All right, so you can use a form to use the get method, but notice some of the drawbacks already. First off, you see up on the command line the actual variables being passed. And if you put some spaces in, I imagine you'll see those special characters. I see things moving. I don't know whether it's me. Okay, so let me just put in here Abe, Blab, Access Z, and hit send. And you can see what it did. It put pluses in up here to indicate that there's some additional data. All right, so you got to just understand that it's going to add some things when items are missing. So that's how that works. So I really wouldn't use get with a form. I'll just go over and show you the code so you can see what the difference was. And so if you come over here and see this, I just changed this from method from post to get. That's all I did. So on a form, or if we ever get to Ajax, you are going to use post most of the time. I would say 100% of the time, unless you have a really good reason for it that I can't think of. And if you have a hyperlink and you're sending data along with a hyperlink like we did earlier, you don't have to do anything. It's automatically considered get, G-E-T. And in PHP, you have the ability to get at the variables either specifically with the method type variable. In other words, they have a method type variable for post data, method type variable for get data, and then they have a aggregate. Now I tend to use the request one unless there's going to be a security issue. So you don't want to have a program processing a variable coming through get. Now somebody can spoof it. So they can send something through. If they know what the actual key names are, they can put it up on the command line, and then request will actually see it. Now, if someone sends variables that the program doesn't need, of course your program's just going to ignore them. They'll be on the list, but they're just going to be ignored. All right, so you have those three variables, and you'll see those same kinds of variables in other programming languages. If you want to bear with me, I'll just do one more thing I had on the list. And that's the session variable. And then we'll just run a little long. Unless you have something to do, go right ahead and do it, and I'll take questions at that point. So the last one is the session variable, and just to introduce session. So these are all really introductory examples, but the guts are there. So for server data going back and forth, you're seeing it. It's just a matter of the programming of it. What do you do on the other side? For example, you have to make sure the variables actually arrive. So you might, even though you're writing the program, you might want to make sure the program works. If you're the PHP programmer and you're not the client-side programmer, you're guaranteed you're going to test to see if the key names are showing up, and they are showing up as the right method. So you'll put a lot of logic in there to protect yourself from the client-side programmer. So when you're in that meeting and everybody's going to be doing what they call a code review, you're just going to be sitting there sipping your iced tea with a smiley face, whereas the client-side programmer is going to be getting beat up for not following certain best practices. So, but if you're writing your own code and you're doing both the client and the server side, you might not be too particular about checking to see if all the key names are coming. But that's all coding. Now, the other thing that you want to do is sending data back and forth is part of the idea of knowing whether the user having session variables. And session variables are used for various things. One of the big items they're used for is keeping track of whether the user is actually logged in or not. So what they do is they keep this data on the server side. So different from a cookie, a session data is stored on the server using an ID that's generated automatically by the language. So you can actually find that file on in your hard drive on your local server. You'll actually be able to see this data stored under these key names that are not part of your programming, but it stores them. So that's what session variables are. And I think in ASP they go a little further, or at least ASP did. They had an application and a session. They had a couple of different variations on it. So it's really a construct that has to do with the programming language. And so we want to look at session. So let's change. Let me go to the example. Where do I have this hiding? And we'll do this real quick. So all this goes away, and I'm going to go run this page, and I get an error. I'm actually kind of expecting, no, actually not expecting an error. That's not the error I want. I managed to damage the PHP ending tag. That's better. So I fixed the code without showing you. So basically it's saying there is no variable session. So session is actually something you need to turn on. So usually most of your websites, when you're building them in PHP, you're going to eventually find out about the single file entry point, where the actual PHP website is designed so everybody comes through index.php. So everything else is redirected. But if it's not, every PHP script that needs session is going to have some of the session function at the top of it, and it's called session start. And you might want to spell it correctly. And well, I really managed to mangle that one, didn't I? That looks right. All right, so go back and refresh. Oh, actually, you didn't see me doing the typing. That was a good thing you didn't see me doing it. I really made a mess out of it. All right, let me go show you what I put in. All right, so I added this line, session start. So normally that'll be at the very top. In fact, let me hit escape here. Let's get rid of that item. You'll see this more than likely. Before you even get to any HTML, you often have a lot of PHP stuck at the top of your file, and you might see it stuck up there as one of the very first lines. So that's turning on the session processing on the server, and then session variables can be used. So wherever you put it doesn't really matter, but it's got to be before you use the session variable. So if I come back over to the running program, it's an empty array. So it's just like any other associative array. Nothing too fancy. It's there for you to use. So let's go use it. And so what I'm going to do is type that, $_session. And then the key name, let's say, is visiting. Or is visiting, something like that. And you don't actually have to set it equals to anything. Again, you can always test to see if the key is there. But we'll put in here, inside of quotes, we'll make it a string, but true. And you can certainly make it a Boolean. We didn't talk about Boolean or logics tonight. Next week we'll do the flows and some of those. I want to get to this really good stuff that has to do with why you're using PHP, and this is the grunt of it right here. These are the things. Minus databases. All right, so now if we go back over and try this, and you can see the variables being shown. So if I go to another page, this is the point. If I go to a second web page, and in that second web page I start the session, I can see this variable. So this gives you the ability to store data between pages dynamically. And there's a lifetime to a session variable that's built into your PHP. You can find it under PHP Info. You know, it might be an hour, it might be a couple days, I forget, but it can be reset. And so eventually the session variable will go away. And you can also destroy the session. There's functions for destroying the session. I'm just going to go over to do a search, and I'll bring you over there. PHP session. Go right to the manual. And I'll bring you over there. Hopefully it's the right page. I took a quick look at it and then I realized it wasn't the one I wanted. There you go. So you can see there's a series of functions for doing all kinds of fancy items. The key one is session start. You don't have to worry about session end unless you need to destroy all the session data. Then you can get rid of a variable by using unset. Unset is how you get rid of a key item in an associative array, and they have a special one called session unset. And there's other, obviously you can see there's other examples here of functions that you might want to learn about, but I just want to point out it's very simple. You just simply use session start, and then you add values to them, and you can store anything in there. Like if you're starting a shopping cart, you could store in the session variable the time that the cart started, and then as the user's using your web page, they might do some more searching, then they might go and have dinner, and when they come back, you might be afraid that someone else has processed the page on you, so you might have a variable that has the time that they started the shopping cart. And if it has expired, you then will redirect them to another page. So it's all a matter of programming how you might want to use a session variable. Okay, so you're seeing here a page that's just called basic hello world. And I'm going to make a copy of that guy. This editor does not have an easy way of making copies. Or at least I haven't found one that I like. Whatever keystrokes they have in there are too cumbersome. I like a right mouse click duplicate, and they don't have it. But I just went out to the outside. So I created a second file. Alright, so I'm just going to say page 2. And I'm not going to set the variable. I'm just going to display it. Oh, you didn't even see what I was doing. You should be throwing rocks at me. Alright, so I made a copy of the file. Just made a copy of it. And I simply took out the line that sets the session variable that we were looking at before. We're still starting the session. We're just displaying what's in session. Alright, so now we're going to run that script. And then I think we can go to questions. Alright, so that one is called, let's get rid of all this extra junk here. And that one's called hello world _2. Alright, so I'm on this other page and it's showing me the same variable. So if I go back to the first page and refresh it, I don't know why all these gets ended up in here, but I guess it was from the previous demo. We were doing the form with the get. Alright, so again, we're seeing the same variable, but this is the page that actually sets the variable. So I'm going to go over without taking you over to the code, and I'm going to change is visiting to false. And then I'll refresh the page. So now in my PHP logic, I could say, well, you can't see this, or we're going to show you the logins panel, or whatever you might want to do. And so I just change the value to this, and if I go to the other page, let's see, it doesn't have it in the history, so I'll just add it in here. And you can see that every page is going to read the session data and see the same values, and your PHP code can act accordingly. So that's quite a bit, and it worked out exactly what I wanted to do. A little long, but we're running good. I'm going to put my headphones on. And I don't know if okay, I'm going to hear myself talk, so bear with me. Alright, so let's see if you got any questions. You can either do it through the chat thing, or you can just speak. Okay, good. We're just looking at basics. Yep.
Hey, it's Rob. Can you show that code? Oh, you did. You just put it back up again. You said you took a line out where you were setting a value. Is that it? Did you put that back in? The session is visiting?
Right. So here you go. The second script. Well, let me take the headphones on. Okay, the second script. I'm not setting a variable. The first script. So this is the file that I set the session variable in. I just chose that file as a demo. Ordinarily, you might set the session variable based on the fact that they had a successful on every page. You might set this variable on every page. So you might set a variable that's something like a recent visitor, and then expire it.
And then at what point do you have to end the session, or do you have to do that?
All right, hold on. I'll get right back to you. I hear the question. I just want to put my headphones back on. All right, so you don't have to end the session. There's no reason to end it. The session variables will stay there. In fact, when I talk, let me take the headphones off. I'm talking to myself. I go getting there crazy. When do people hear this video, they'll think I'm nuts. So this is a matter of what you need to accomplish. So on a simple level, I would say you would have a session variable that may track that a particular web browser, a particular access to your site came in, and you're going to store the session variable, so when they come back when they go from page to page. So I think the session variable gets recreated. I have to actually look this up. I have to think how this works, because I don't use it this way. This is too loose for me. The session variable, once you create it, as long as the user is browsing your website, the session variable stays associated. Actually, the way it works is it actually uses a cookie. So it actually identifies a cookie on the web browser. That's correct. Adds a cookie on the web browser. So the cookie on the web browser ties in to the session storage location for that particular cookie. So there's every one of those cookies associated with certain data. So if you had 2 users coming to your website, theoretically, each one of them would have a session variable that says is visiting, but because their cookie file has a different cookie ID in it. And you can look at those details in the session variable. So now the question was, when do I get rid of it? Well, if you have a variable that is based on them doing something, and when they're completed doing it to get rid of it, you would do it there. So an example would be, I logged in, so you might want to keep track of the fact that they're logged in. And that's usually a good use of the session variable. I am logged in. User is logged in. And you might also keep track of the time that they logged in as a second key item. So now they go from web page to web page. You're always seeing that they're logged in and they haven't passed the expiration time that you decided to set. And so they're free to go through the website as a logged in user and access whatever you want to present them based on a login state. Then at a certain point in time, they may decide to log out. Now, generally people log out because they're trying to protect their own, their own login data that you can see, count data, things like that. But at that point, you would just simply unset the variable. So it's this simple. There's a couple ways. This is one of the ways, and there's another way. You just simply do, let's see, I'll use this one over here. Hold on a second, my headphones have fallen on my mouse. Okay, so session unset. And session unset is destructive of all. So that'll just wipe them all out. So on that page, you would then, on the server side, destroy all the session variables. They're all gone. Or you can do let's say log in equals false. So you could reset, you could set the variable to something different that means something to you. That's another way. Another way is you could do unset, which is a function in PHP that removes a variable from memory, in which case it removes it from the session.
Great, and it's keeping us...
Unset is for any variable. All right, I'll put my headphones back on. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's a shot at it. So ask again if you're...
That keeps a session variable for each user then, visiting the site?
Each cookie.
Okay.
So I would think that might be by a web browser.
Yeah, I think so. Great, okay, very...
Right, so there's a lot of different possible ways of implementing user session, but you implement user session on the server side so that it can't be spoofed in any way. So as long as this will work. Now, I'm not sure whether this will work without cookies, but I think it does. It works in another fashion. But definitely cookies are required. So I usually assume anybody coming to my websites has cookies on if they're doing serious stuff like logging in. Right. So there you go. You got that capability. I think if we close web browser, let me try that and come back, and it might be gone. Let's just see. How do I close this web browser? Okay, over here. Quit. All right. Restarting it. And that's the answer to that question was false. it still sees the variable. So I generally use it to keep tracking of the user being logged in and data associated with the login. So there's usually a key there that says that they are logged in or not. And then any data that's associated with them, I assume is tainted if the variable indicated they weren't logged in. So I wouldn't use any data I stored there.
Got it. Great. Thanks, Lon.
Okay, everybody, good? All right, I'm going to hopefully see this record. And if it does record, or if the record does work, I'll put it up on there and the file's up on the website. Okay, good night all.
Thanks, Lon.